From as early as I can remember, my life has felt like a perpetual performance for my family, a performance where I never got applause. My name is Clara Reynolds, and in my household, appearances mattered more than reality, and favoritism was a law written in stone. My parents, Eleanor and Richard Reynolds, were the kind of people who thrived on social status. They ran a small but influential chain of boutique hotels across the city, a business that should have made all of us comfortable, yet for me, it was a trap disguised as opportunity. My older siblings, Lucas and Vivienne, floated through life like golden tickets. College in Paris, luxury cars, designer wardrobes, they had the world on a silver platter. And me, I had my hands raw from labor, my mind exhausted from tasks no one ever acknowledged. While my siblings were learning French over croissants or attending galas, I was managing invoices, arranging deliveries, answering emails at all hours, often without pay. My parents called it family responsibility. My siblings called it Clara's daily chores. The breaking point, however, was never a single event. It was years of accumulation, like water filling a cracked vase. My resentment simmered beneath polite smiles and quiet compliance. My parents justified their favoritism by saying I was mature enough to handle more work, as if I had chosen to be invisible. One evening, it all came to a head. I was 19, scrubbing the floors of the newest hotel branch, while Lucas hosted a lavish party for potential investors upstairs. The music thumped against the walls, laughter spilling down the grand staircase, and I thought, for the millionth time, why me? As I bent over a mop, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan, a guest I'd met a few weeks prior. He was an architect overseeing the renovation of the hotel, and unlike anyone in my life, he had treated me with respect and attention. He texted, "Dinner after your shift. I have something to show you." The small warmth that bloomed in my chest surprised me. Ethan had a way of making the world outside my family feel real and worth exploring. But I glanced at the clock and sighed. My parents would be home soon, and I had to finish cleaning before they noticed the mess I hadn't caused but would be blamed for. "Clara, can you double-check the accounts?" My father's voice snapped me back. He appeared at the entrance, a glass of brandy in hand, smiling faintly, a smile that never reached his eyes. "Yes, father," I muttered, forcing my hands to stop shaking. It wasn't just the workload. It was the invisible chain of expectations. I had learned early that complaining brought punishment, yet my own dreams, my own freedom, were quietly suffocating beneath the weight of duty. Hours later, after the last guest left and the hotel glistened with polished perfection, I finally collapsed into the office chair, my back aching, hands raw. My phone buzzed again, Ethan. "Meet me at the cafe across the street. No excuses." I hesitated. The temptation was dangerous. My family had drilled obedience into me, yet my heart screamed for rebellion. I grabbed my coat, slipped quietly into the night, and felt the cool air against my face for the first time that day, realizing how starved I was for something beyond their expectations. Ethan was waiting, leaning casually against the cafe's brick wall, his dark eyes scanning until they found me. A genuine smile spread across his face. "You made it," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "I needed a break," I confessed, lowering my gaze. He offered me a cup of coffee and motioned toward a corner table. As I settled in, the aroma and warmth wrapped around me like an embrace. "Clara," he began carefully, "I don't think anyone understands what you go through. I see it, though. I see you." His words pierced through the years of neglect. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of a stranger caring more than my own family, but instead, tears pricked my eyes. I felt seen for the first time, and it was terrifying. I don't even know where to start," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Start anywhere," he said. "Tell me everything, I'm listening." And for the first time, I did. I told him about the endless work, the favoritism, the invisibility that had plagued my existence. I told him about Lucas, laughter echoing through rooms I cleaned, Vivienne's stories from Paris I was never part of, and my parents' cold justification that it was all for my growth. He listened, not interrupting, simply absorbing, nodding when I faltered or cried. When I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand in his. His touch was light, reassuring, and yet it sparked something rebellious inside me, a dangerous, thrilling idea. "You don't deserve this, Clara. None of it," he said quietly. "If your family won't see your worth, you'll have to show them. You'll have to make them understand you're not their invisible laborer anymore." I swallowed, the idea burning in my chest. Show them. But how? My rebellion was a whisper in the grand mansion of my life, a whisper they would likely ignore. Yet, Ethan's presence made the impossible seem possible. As we left the cafe, walking under the city's nightlights, I realized something terrifyingly liberating. I was ready. Ready to step out of their shadows, ready to claim what I had earned by heart, sweat, and tears. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice, about recognition, and unexpectedly, about love. Little did I know, that night marked the first step toward a confrontation that would shake my family to its core, expose long-hidden secrets, and ignite a chain of events I could neither predict nor control. The war for my freedom had begun, and it started with a single, audacious choice: to stop being invisible. The morning after my secret meeting with Ethan, the house felt suffocating in ways I hadn't realized before. The polished floors gleamed as usual, the scent of fresh croissants wafted from the kitchen, and my parents' voices floated down the hall, discussing investments and renovations as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed inside me. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't continue bending under the weight of a family that treated me like an unpaid worker while showering my siblings with privilege. But standing up to them wasn't just about saying no, it was about strategy. My family thrived on appearances. To confront them blindly would be a disaster. Lucas passed me in the hallway, wearing that smug grin that had haunted my dreams for years. "Morning, Clara. Don't forget the client meeting today. I'll be late, so you'll handle it," he said casually, tossing me a sheaf of papers. I took them silently, nodding, hiding the storm that had begun brewing inside me. For years, I had responded politely, obediently. No more. As I entered my makeshift office, Ethan's words from last night echoed in my mind. "You'll have to show them. You'll have to make them understand you're not their invisible laborer anymore." It started with small acts of defiance. I reorganized the client presentations in a way that highlighted my contributions, ensuring my fingerprints were visible on every successful proposal. I kept meticulous records of everything I had done. From bookkeeping errors I corrected to hours, I had logged fixing last-minute hotel crises. Every document, every email became evidence of the work that had gone unseen for years. Meanwhile, Ethan became my anchor. He encouraged me, reminding me that my value wasn't defined by my family's perception. On quiet nights, he would whisper in my ear, his voice both soothing and daring. "You're stronger than they'll ever admit, Clara. They'll try to ignore you, dismiss you, but you have power they've never given you credit for." And power I did have. I had knowledge of the hotel's finances, operations, and relationships with vendors. I had connections that Lucas and Vivienne lacked, and most importantly, I had a fire in my chest that refused to be doused. The first real confrontation came when my father, Richard, called a family meeting under the guise of discussing the upcoming expansion of their newest boutique hotel. The room was warm, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, and my mother's smile was the practiced perfection I had seen all my life. "I want updates from everyone," he announced, his tone clipped but expectant. "Lucas, Vivienne, and Clara." I swallowed, feeling my heartbeat thrum against my ribs. Lucas rolled his eyes subtly. Vivienne glanced at me with mild curiosity, and my parents waited, expecting the usual report of silent compliance. Instead, I spoke clearly, deliberately, outlining every successful project I had managed in the past 6 months, the renovations, the vendor negotiations, the staff conflicts I had resolved. I showed spreadsheets, email threads, and reports I had prepared, all highlighting my role. The room went silent. My father's jaw tightened, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, and Lucas sputtered before finding words. "Clara, that's a lot, sure, but..." No, Lucas, I interrupted, my voice steady. That's exactly what it is, a lot. And it's exactly why I should be compensated, recognized, and treated fairly. For years, I've done everything you've asked without complaint, without acknowledgement, while you too enjoyed privileges I was denied. I am done being invisible. Vivienne looked shocked, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the armrests of her chair. Clara, you can't just... I can, I said, my voice rising, the fire inside me igniting fully. Because I've spent my life working for free while my contributions were ignored. No more. Either you treat me as an equal or I will walk away. It's that simple. My mother's serene mask slipped, revealing a flicker of irritation. Clara, this is not how families behave. You're overreacting. No, Mother, I said, standing tall. I am asserting my value. You taught me that family loyalty means sacrifice, but sacrifice is not servitude, and I am not your servant. Ethan's words had never felt more real. I was standing on the precipice of freedom, and the exhilaration was terrifying and addictive. The confrontation didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, I implemented subtle changes. I renegotiated vendor contracts under my name, arranged meetings that excluded Lucas and Vivienne, and made sure my work was visible to clients and partners. Slowly, a ripple of recognition began forming outside the walls of my home. People who had never known my name now asked for me directly, and my family noticed. Lucas's arrogance began to falter. Vivienne's charm couldn't mask her irritation, and my parents, the architects of my invisibility, realized that the daughter they had underestimated had begun wielding influence of her own. And yet, amidst the tension, Ethan and I found moments of tenderness. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, he took my hand and led me to a quiet rooftop terrace. The city lights stretched endlessly, and for a moment, the world felt ours alone. You're amazing, Clara, he said softly. I've never seen someone fight with such courage. I leaned into him, letting the warmth of his embrace soothe the sting of confrontation. I'm scared, I admitted. I've never stood up like this before. What if I fail? You won't fail, he whispered. Because you're not just fighting for recognition, you're fighting for yourself. And that, Clara, makes you unstoppable. The thrill of rebellion mixed with the warmth of love created a dangerous cocktail. I was no longer just the obedient daughter. I was Clara Reynolds, a woman claiming her space in the world, daring to be seen, daring to love, daring to confront the family that had kept me hidden for so long. And little did I know, my family was preparing their own countermoves, unaware that I was no longer the invisible child they thought they controlled. The battle lines were drawn, and the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. By the time I returned to the house that night, my mind was buzzing with plans. I would no longer work for free. I would no longer let my siblings' privileges overshadow my achievements. I would fight, not just for money, not just for recognition, but for the dignity that had been denied to me for years. And somewhere deep in my heart, I realized that the fight would not just transform my relationship with my family. It would transform me forever. After weeks of asserting myself, I finally began to feel the first glimmers of empowerment. My parents had stopped asking me to take the midnight deliveries alone. Lucas had stopped tossing his tasks my way as if I were invisible. And Vivienne, well, she still shot me sharp looks, but even she couldn't ignore the fact that I was no longer the timid, compliant sibling I had been. But the quiet victories weren't enough. My instincts told me the family wouldn't give up so easily. If I truly wanted freedom and equality, I needed leverage. And then, by accident, I found it. It was during an audit of the hotel accounts. I had been working late, alone in the office, reviewing contracts, when I stumbled upon a series of irregularities. Certain vendors had been overpaid, contracts were mysteriously altered, and most importantly, Lucas's name was tied to several questionable payments that had gone unnoticed by my father. My heart pounded. I knew immediately that this was the key I had been searching for. Evidence not just of my family's favoritism, but of carelessness, even deceit, that could no longer be ignored. For the first time, I felt the intoxicating rush of control. I could make them acknowledge me or risk exposure. The temptation was thrilling, but also terrifying. Part of me wanted to confront my family immediately, but Ethan's voice echoed in my mind. Don't act out of anger, act strategically. So I waited. In the meantime, my relationship with Ethan deepened in ways I hadn't expected. He became my confidant, my advisor, and sometimes my anchor when my resolve faltered. One evening, after another exhausting day of negotiations, we found ourselves on the terrace of the city's tallest building. The skyline glittered, reflecting off Ethan's eyes in a way that made my pulse race. "You've changed," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Not just in confidence, but in power. You're like a storm waiting to hit, Clara." I smiled faintly. I feel like I've spent my whole life storming silently, waiting for a chance to be noticed. Now, I don't want to wait anymore. Ethan leaned in, and the first kiss we shared was electric, an unspoken promise of partnership, rebellion, and passion all at once. That kiss wasn't just romantic. It was a spark igniting a fire that had been dormant for years. It gave me courage I hadn't known I possessed. The next morning, I set my plan into motion. I began documenting everything carefully: contracts, payments, emails, and internal memos. Every piece of evidence was meticulously cataloged, but I didn't confront my father or Lucas immediately. I wanted a stage, a moment where my presence would be undeniable. Then came the perfect opportunity. My parents announced a high-profile gala at our flagship hotel, inviting influential investors, city dignitaries, and longtime family friends. Lucas and Vivienne would be center stage, basking in the spotlight, while I would be relegated to serving hors d'oeuvres and making sure the evening ran smoothly. But this time, I wasn't invisible. I had prepared a report, a detailed exposé of my contributions to the family business, paired with the discrepancies I had uncovered. I printed copies, prepared a presentation, and even rehearsed my words carefully, ensuring they were precise, professional, and impossible to ignore. When the night of the gala arrived, I slipped into a simple, elegant dress, nothing flashy, nothing designed to draw attention, yet I felt a quiet confidence radiating from me. Ethan was at my side, his hand brushing mine as if reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. The evening began as expected. Lucas charmed the investors, Vivienne laughed gracefully at the jokes, and my parents glided through the room, exuding sophistication. And then it was my moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, carrying through the grand hall. All eyes turned toward me. Shock flickered across faces, my family's included. "I'd like to take a moment to talk about the work behind the scenes that makes this family business successful." I laid out my report, showing contracts, payments, and my direct involvement in projects that had been publicly credited to Lucas or Vivienne. I highlighted my hours of unpaid labor, my meticulous problem-solving, and finally, the discrepancies I had uncovered. The room was silent. Investors whispered among themselves, glancing at my family with growing curiosity and concern. My father's face was pale. My mother's smile had vanished. Lucas's lips pressed into a tight line, and Vivienne's fingers trembled around her champagne glass. "You've hidden all of this?" my father finally asked, voice low and sharp. "I've documented it," I said. "Because for years my work has gone unseen, my efforts ignored, while my siblings received recognition and rewards. I'm here to make sure that changes, fairly, equally, and transparently." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding in approval. Ethan, standing at the back, gave me a small, reassuring smile. Lucas tried to speak, stammering through excuses and deflections, but the evidence was undeniable. Even Vivienne, who had always been untouchable, couldn't argue with the facts. That night, the tide shifted. I didn't just expose the favoritism. I proved my competence, my value, and my independence. I had taken the invisible child and turned her into the undeniable force my family could no longer dismiss. As the gala ended and the guests departed, I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and relief. I had done it, not just for myself, but for the years I had been overlooked. And through it all, Ethan's hand found mine once more, grounding me, reminding me that love and rebellion could coexist in the same heartbeat. But as I walked through the empty hotel halls, the quiet thrill of victory mingled with a nagging uncertainty. My family was reeling, yes, but they weren't defeated. They would adapt, they would retaliate, and the next move would not be mine alone. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a war that would test my courage, my heart, and my ability to hold onto the man who had become my anchor in the storm. The morning after the gala, the Reynolds house was a different place. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that settles like dust in a room after a storm. My parents avoided eye contact, speaking only in clipped sentences. Lucas moved through the house silently, his arrogance replaced with a cautious calculation. Vivienne, usually untouchable, stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and envy. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt an odd heaviness. Taking a stand had been exhilarating, yes, but it came with consequences I hadn't fully anticipated. My parents were plotting their next move, and I could sense the subtle ways they tried to undermine me, excluding me from decisions I had previously managed, questioning my judgment in front of vendors, and strategically handing Lucas tasks that had once been mine. But this time, I didn't panic. I had Ethan, my anchor, and I had leverage. I reminded myself that courage wasn't just about making a move, it was about sustaining it. It started with small incidents. My father called me into the office under the pretense of discussing hotel renovations. As soon as I sat down, he left. But I was learning quickly. The higher the stakes, the sweeter the victory, and the more dangerous the game. By the time Clara Reynolds, me, had fully established my foothold in the family business, the tension at home had transformed from subtle antagonism into outright hostility. Every move I made, every small victory was met with a counterattack. Lucas had escalated his sabotage. Vivienne's whispers were no longer confined to vendors. They reached investors. And my parents, Eleanor and Richard, seemed to oscillate between anger and strategic patience, as if plotting how to regain control without appearing vindictive. The first major escalation came unexpectedly. One morning, as I prepared for an important meeting with a key investor, I discovered my laptop had been tampered with. Files were missing, and the presentation I had perfected over nights of careful work had been altered. Whoever did this knew precisely which buttons to push to destabilize me. My heart raced. Years of frustration, humiliation, and invisible labor boiled within me. I could have panicked. I could have reacted impulsively, but I didn't. Ethan's words came to mind. "Stay strategic, Clara. Act with precision, not emotion." Instead of confronting anyone immediately, I traced the sabotage. My instincts were right. Lucas. His fingerprints were all over the altered files, and for the first time I felt a dangerous satisfaction. He had finally crossed a line, and now he would face consequences. The next confrontation was inevitable. I found him in the private lounge, pretending to review reports, his expression arrogantly casual. "Lucas," I said, voice calm but commanding, "we need to discuss your little stunt." He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, this should be interesting. What you've finally noticed I exist." I ignored the jab. "You've interfered with my work, jeopardized important meetings, and attempted to undermine my reputation. And I've documented everything." His smirk faltered slightly as I laid out the evidence. Emails, timestamps, digital footprints, proof undeniable. The room was heavy with tension. You can't," he began, but I cut him off. "I can, Lucas," I said, holding his gaze. "Because I'm no longer the invisible sibling you've relied on to cover your mistakes. If anything like this happens again, I will ensure every investor and stakeholder knows exactly what you did." For the first time, I saw hesitation in his eyes. I had won this round, but the war was far from over. Meanwhile, my relationship with Ethan evolved under the weight of these battles. Our love was no longer just a comfort. It was a source of strategy, of courage. We spent late nights planning, navigating the treacherous waters of family politics, and sharing stolen moments of passion amidst chaos. Every touch, every kiss, felt like a declaration. We were allies, partners, and lovers in a world that had long denied me autonomy. But the stakes grew even higher. One evening, as I reviewed hotel accounts, a message arrived from an unknown source. A thinly veiled threat suggesting that my family might go beyond sabotage to more dangerous measures. Fear prickled my spine, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. This wasn't just about work anymore. It was about survival, dignity, and justice. That night, Ethan and I devised a plan. We would secure every piece of documentation, ensure transparency in every project, and subtly expose any future sabotage before it could take root. We became a unit, my knowledge, his expertise, our shared determination forming a shield against attacks. Then came the pivotal moment. A high-stakes investor gala where all major stakeholders in the hotel chain would be present. The perfect stage to assert my authority and demonstrate that I was not just a competent operator, but an essential force in the business. I prepared meticulously. Every contract, every report, every past contribution was ready to be presented. I rehearsed speeches, projected confidence, and for the first time in my life, allowed myself to feel the thrill of owning my power. The night arrived. Lucas and Vivienne were there, each radiating poised confidence, but beneath it I sensed anxiety. My parents observed quietly, their expressions unreadable. And there in the crowd, Ethan's hand brushed mine, a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. As I presented, outlining key successes, strategic improvements, and my documented contributions, the room's attention shifted. Investors whispered among themselves, impressed by my professionalism and vision. My family's carefully maintained facade began to crumble. My parents' faces reflected a mix of pride and unease. Luca's and Vivienne's carefully polished confidence wavered. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The battle for recognition, for independence, had transformed into something larger. I wasn't just claiming my place in the family. I was reclaiming my identity, asserting my worth, and demonstrating that love, courage, and strategy could coexist in one person. After the gala, as the city lights glittered around us, Ethan and I found a quiet terrace. He held me close, his lips brushing my hair. "You've done it," he whispered. "You've taken your power." I leaned into him, letting exhaustion and exhilaration mingle. "Not completely," I admitted. "The family fight isn't over, but for the first time I'm not afraid." He kissed me then, a long, lingering promise of partnership, passion, and unwavering support. And in that kiss I felt the truth. No matter what came next, I was no longer invisible. I was Clara Reynolds, seen, heard, loved, and unstoppable. But as we stood together under the city lights, a quiet thrill ran through me, a whisper of danger that reminded me. The Reynolds family never gave up easily, and neither would I. Just when I thought I had the upper hand, the Reynolds family escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. It started subtly, emails disappearing, meetings mysteriously canceled, and the quiet coldness from my parents that felt heavier than ever. But then, the betrayal hit closer to home. One afternoon, I arrived at the office to find a note slipped under my door. No signature, no explanation, just a single sentence. "You're making a mistake, Clara. Some truths are better left buried." My chest tightened. I knew instinctively this was more than a warning. Someone had crossed a line, and my stomach twisted with both fear and fury. I called Ethan immediately. His calm, reassuring voice over the phone was a lifeline. "Stay calm," he said. "We need to find out who's behind this before it escalates. Don't confront anyone yet." I nodded, my mind racing. My family had always operated in layers, hidden motives, whispered instructions, silent manipulation. This was just another layer, but it felt dangerously personal. That night, I decided to do something I hadn't dared before. I dug deeper into the hotel accounts, tracing transactions, emails, and logs, following a trail I knew could expose whoever was trying to undermine me. What I discovered made my heart stop. Vivienne, she had secretly collaborated with a distant cousin who had access to our financial records. Together, they had been quietly siphoning funds, trying to frame me for negligence, hoping it would discredit me and restore her control over the family's affairs. I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the same thrill that had carried me through previous confrontations. But this time, it was mixed with a personal sting. Vivienne, my sister, had turned against me in the most intimate way possible. The betrayal cut deeper than Lucas's sabotage or even my parents' favoritism. I knew I had to act strategically. I couldn't let anger blind me. Ethan arrived that evening, his presence steadying me as I laid out the evidence. "This is serious," he said, scanning the documents. "But it also gives you leverage. You can confront her and the family with proof they can't ignore, but it has to be smart, public, undeniable, and precise." The next morning, I requested a family meeting. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with anticipation. I would finally expose Vivienne's betrayal, and in doing so, cement my position in a way that couldn't be erased. When my family gathered, Lucas's smugness returned, thinking he had regained some ground. Vivienne's expression was a mix of curiosity and annoyance, while my parents tried to maintain composure. I began calmly, methodically. I presented the evidence, tracing every transaction and email, showing Vivienne's collaboration with the cousin to undermine me. My voice was steady, and I felt a strange thrill in watching the shock ripple across their faces. Vivienne's lips parted, but no words came out. Lucas's smugness faded, replaced with disbelief. My parents' faces went pale, the calculated masks they had worn for decades faltered. You set me up," I said, locking eyes with Vivienne. "After everything, after years of favoritism and undermining, you thought this would destroy me." She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance to twist the narrative. "Look at the evidence. Every single transaction, every manipulated email. It's all here. And if anyone doubts me, I have copies secured with Ethan. This isn't just about exposing you, it's about making sure the truth finally gets the recognition it deserves." The room was silent. My parents were too shocked to intervene. Lucas looked cornered, and Vivienne's eyes filled with rage and shame. For the first time in years, I felt the full weight of empowerment. Ethan reached out, taking my hand under the table, grounding me. "You handled this perfectly," he whispered. The aftermath was intense. My parents were forced to acknowledge my contributions publicly. Vivienne was restricted from managing finances, and Lucas's attempts at manipulation were closely monitored. I had not just survived. One night, after a particularly grueling day, we stood on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. "You did it, Clara," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You've faced betrayal, manipulation, and threats, and you've come out stronger." I leaned into him, letting the tension melt away. "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. "You've been my anchor, my strategist, my love." He kissed me deeply, a slow, lingering promise that spoke of passion, trust, and the battles we had endured together. But even in that intimate moment, I knew the war wasn't entirely over. The Reynolds family had been shaken, yes, but families like ours never surrendered quietly. And I, Clara Reynolds, had learned one undeniable truth. Power, love, and courage were intertwined, and the coming days would test every part of me, my mind, my heart, and my very identity. And for the first time, I welcomed the challenge. The Reynolds household had never felt so tense. After months of maneuvering, exposing betrayals, and reclaiming my rightful place, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. I could sense that my family was aware this was the moment everything could change or collapse entirely. It started with a family meeting called by my father, Richard, who had reluctantly ceded some authority but clearly hadn't surrendered completely. Lucas and Vivienne attended with their usual polished facades, but I could read the tension behind their smiles. They had realized that I was no longer the quiet, invisible sibling. They were dealing with a force they had underestimated for years. I entered the room, calm and poised, Ethan discreetly at my side. My heart was steady. Every step, every decision, every strategy had led to this moment. I was ready. "My father," I began, voice firm, "you called this meeting, so I'll assume you want clarity. Let me make one thing absolutely clear. The era of favoritism and secrecy is over." My work, my ideas, and my leadership are not just valid, they are essential, and any attempt to undermine them will not be tolerated. Richard's expression tightened. Clara, I admire your ambition, but this isn't how families operate. Power isn't just about documents, it's about respect. I met his gaze evenly. Respect is earned, and for years I earned it silently while my siblings were rewarded for doing less. No more. I'm not asking for respect, I am claiming it. Lucas tried to interject, but I raised a hand. Lucas, Vivienne, your actions have been observed, documented, and addressed. This isn't personal, it's accountability. And if you continue to interfere with my work, you will face consequences that go beyond family squabbles. The room was silent, the weight of truth settling heavily on everyone present. Ethan's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. And then the final, unexpected twist arrived. My mother, Eleanor, who had often stayed silent or offered thinly veiled criticism, stood and spoke. Clara, she said, her voice soft but firm, I see now what I've overlooked. I see the work, the dedication, and the courage. You have proven yourself not just as my daughter, but as a leader, and I am proud of you. The admission hit me harder than I expected. Pride, relief, and validation surged through me. For years, I had fought for acknowledgement, for equality, for the right to be seen. And finally, I had it, not just professionally, but personally. The meeting ended with a tentative truce. My father stepped back further from decision-making. Lucas and Vivienne were carefully monitored, and I was formally recognized as a co-leader of the family business. For the first time in years, the Reynolds family dynamic had shifted irreversibly. That evening, Ethan and I celebrated quietly. We didn't need grand gestures, just a shared sense of accomplishment and intimacy. On the terrace overlooking the city, we held each other close, the wind tousling our hair, the lights sparkling below like a reflection of all we had fought for. You did it, Ethan whispered, brushing his lips against my forehead. You've claimed your power, your independence, and you've done it without losing who you are. I smiled, heart full. We did it together. I couldn't have faced any of this alone. He kissed me deeply, passionately, and I felt the culmination of months of fear, anger, strategy, and love in that single, lingering connection. In that moment, nothing else existed except us, and the undeniable truth that I was no longer invisible. The following weeks were transformative. I consolidated my position in the business, implemented systems that ensured transparency, and nurtured relationships with investors and staff who now recognized my authority. Lucas and Vivienne adapted, somewhat reluctantly, but the era of favoritism and secrecy was finally over. And amidst all of it, my relationship with Ethan flourished. Love, trust, and partnership had become inseparable from my journey of self-discovery. We had faced challenges, betrayals, and danger, yet our bond had only deepened. One quiet evening, as we sat together on the balcony, the city glowing below, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The years of being overlooked, the unpaid labor, the subtle and not-so-subtle betrayals, it had all led to this moment. I had fought, strategized, and claimed my place, not just in the family, but in my own life. You're unstoppable, Ethan murmured, his hand brushing mine. I smiled, leaning into him. I finally feel like myself, fully, unapologetically. And with you by my side, there's nothing we can't face. He kissed me then, slow and certain, a promise of shared victories and shared life. And in that kiss, I felt the ultimate truth. Courage, love, and resilience could overcome any obstacle. I had been invisible once, but never again. Clara Reynolds had finally claimed her power, her love, and her destiny, and the storm she had become was unstoppable. The months following the final showdown felt almost surreal. The Reynolds household, once a labyrinth of manipulation and silent rivalries, had begun to settle into a new rhythm when I had helped shape. The power struggles hadn't disappeared entirely, but they no longer held the weight they once did. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the unpaid worker, or the overlooked sibling. I was Clara Reynolds, respected, recognized, and finally free to live on my own terms. In the business, the transformation was clear. Investors and staff alike treated me as a leader, valuing my insight and authority. Projects I had spearheaded flourished under my guidance, and the hotel chain experienced growth and innovation that had long been stifled under old family dynamics. Lucas and Vivienne had adapted, grudgingly, yes, but with a newfound respect I had longed for. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, learned to appreciate my perspective and contributions, and while our relationship remained complex, it had deepened with understanding and honesty. Yet the most profound change was personal. Ethan and I had forged a partnership that went beyond romance. He had been my anchor in the chaos, my strategist in battles, and my confidant in moments of doubt. Together, we had navigated threats, betrayals, and the storm of family politics, and in doing so, we had strengthened our bond beyond measure. Our evenings were no longer defined by strategy sessions or whispered plans. Instead, we celebrated victories, big and small, with laughter, shared dinners, and long walks through the city. Every stolen glance and touch reminded me of how far we had come and how much we had overcome together. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of the Reynolds flagship hotel, the city lights sparkling below like a constellation, Ethan took my hand in his. "Clara," he said softly, "I've watched you rise, fight, and claim what's yours, and I've never been more certain of one thing: you're incredible, and I want to build a life with you beyond all of this." My heart swelled. For years, I had fought for recognition, independence, and respect. And now, standing here with him, I realized I had found something even more precious: love that was unwavering, partnership that was steadfast, and a life that I could finally call my own. "I've wanted that too," I admitted, leaning into him. "More than anything, I want a life where we face everything together, fearless, unapologetic, unstoppable." He kissed me then, slow and full of promise, a sealing of our journey from chaos to clarity. The past, the betrayals, the favoritism, the invisible labor, had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I had taken my place in the family, in the business, and in the world, and I had done it on my own terms. As we held each other, the wind brushing against our faces, I felt a profound sense of peace. The battles had been fierce, the stakes high, but I had emerged not just victorious, but whole. The storm that was Clara Reynolds had calmed, not because the world had changed, but because I had found my power, my voice, and my heart. And for the first time in my life, I could truly say, I am seen, I am loved, I am free. With Ethan by my side, and the knowledge that I had claimed everything I had ever deserved, I stepped into the future without fear, ready for whatever challenges and joys life would bring. Clara Reynolds had finally reclaimed her life, her love, and her destiny, and nothing and no one could take it from her. Clara's story reminds us that being overlooked doesn't mean being powerless, and that love, courage, and determination can turn even the toughest battles into victories. No matter the obstacles or betrayals we face, we all have the strength to claim our voice, our worth, and our happiness. If her journey inspired you, or if you've ever had to fight for what you deserve, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of love, betrayal, and triumph.